everyone. Welcome to another Music Talk Tuesday, and today I thought it'd be interesting to dive into my personal favorite James Horner scores, or at least soundtracks. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about his work, only because it has been, I think, just roughly under a year since his passing. And I thought it would be interesting to sort of explore some of the ones that I'm more familiar with and that I really do appreciate and enjoy listening to. So, without further ado, let me talk about them briefly here. First being Braveheart. This soundtrack really does sort of capture that atmosphere and the story really well. You sort of see how there's this sort of beauty to it, and it's haunting, it's inspiring, it lifts you up. You know, you kind of want to go on an adventure, or you want to just go up and do something, and it really plays into that whole concept of freedom that is so heavily emphasized within the film. And you really do get the sense of the sort of Scottish culture inserted into the music, or at least partially part of the music. And it's nice to see that expressed to a much larger extent than a lot of other soundtracks that have tried to sort of capture maybe a similar thing. And at the end of the day, it ultimately works. And I mean, regardless of whether or not you think Braveheart is a classic or not, or is as great as some people make it out to be, the score, I think, definitely does resonate with the audience well, both within the context of how the film showcases the music, and also how the music tries to capture what's sort of going on within the film as well. So, really, one of James Horner's best, in my opinion, and I think really does work as far as a soundtrack is concerned. Second soundtrack that I wanted to briefly talk about is Titanic. And again, regardless of whether or not you think this film is a little bit overhyped or overrated, James Horner seems to capture the spirit and the essence of the film really well. It has a variety of different moods depending on what's taking place within the film, and it really does capture the essence of the tragedy of Titanic. And regardless of whether or not you like the story that's sort of part of the Titanic film, you can really get behind the music that James Horner presents throughout. And it's really what I think elevates the film in a sense for me, and what I think makes it all the more enjoyable. And it really does try to pay tribute to those people who were unfortunately killed because of the iceberg. And that's something that sometimes people comment that the film itself wasn't really able to maybe capture it as a realistic of a sense, only because we were following characters that weren't actually there. But regardless of that, again, the way in which the score tries to line out the story is ultimately what suits it well, and what reflects onto sort of the time period and what was going on. So ultimately, I think it's definitely a work, one of the better works of James Horner, and one that I really do honestly remember of his. So really well done, I think, on his part. And it just shows you how much music plays a role as far as really trying to capture the story, or at least try to capture a part of the story. Third soundtrack that I wanted to briefly mention is of A Beautiful Mind. Basically, this one is actually interesting and unique from other James Horner pieces in that it does try to play around with the uh, genius and kind of madness angle that's sort of part of the main character within this film. And it does it in a way that's very that is done in a way that's kind of speeds up at certain points and then again slows down at others. And so you sort of really get the essence of the mind that in particular the main character has. And I think that's really interesting and actually I think really works to this particular soundtrack's advantage in what it's trying to capture. And you do sense the beauty as well as the sort of inspiration, that goes along with the genius that's sort of part of the main character as well. And it really works out fairly effectively. And again, whether or not you think the Beautiful Mind is that as great of a film or not, the soundtrack I think lives up to the ideas and concepts that the film was really trying to get across, especially with the whole concept of really focusing and honing in on this one particular character that did have a very advanced mind that made him sort of unique and different, and at the same time a genius. So I think that's something that's really interesting and definitely worthy of recommendation. So yeah, I think it's one of his best and one that I do remember hearing. Second to last one that I want to briefly mention is The Land Before Time. This one is actually really interesting because you get the sense of adventure and wonder, and there's also this very childlike innocence and nostalgia and curiosity, and that's really something that I think definitely resonates with people, and I think ultimately really works within the context of this particular film. Also, you really do get the sense that even though it has these childlike qualities to it, you also understand that it takes itself seriously and that it applies things within an adult context to where it doesn't really necessarily matter your age level. There is this sense of that regardless, you can sort of identify with it. And I think that's really what captures people, really what resonates with people really well. And it's definitely one that I do remember, and one that I think does enhance the overall experience of the film itself. So definitely worthy of recommendation, and I think James Horner did a really good job with that one. Last but certainly not least, Apollo 13. You not only got the sense of adventure and excitement and maybe a certain level of patriotism as well, but you also got the sense of overcoming obstacles and dealing with tense pressure. The film's sort of all over the place, and the soundtrack tries to kind of give you certain moods and really does reflect onto the whole spirit that was really a part of the film. And you sort of see how, again, it plays a role in sort of enhancing the overall experience. So I think it's definitely interesting in how it chose to approach certain parts of the soundtrack. And again, that within the context of what's going on, at least within the film, you do end up getting a sense of what the characters as well as the circumstances and how that plays into the way in which the soundtrack is approached. And overall, it gives a satisfying understanding of the sort of emotions that people uh, can kind of get behind when sort of watching the film. So I think that's really all I can say about all of these soundtracks. Now, all of these different pieces can be found online. I'm sure you could download the soundtracks as well if you have like a Spotify account or something like that. Um, but they're all really unique in the way in which they uh, are approached, and I think James Horner did a very good job with these particular pieces that I've mentioned before. And there's obviously other ones that I think you could point to as well and say that you've enjoyed over the years. I'd be more than happy to hear what anybody else has to say as far as their personal favorites, but these were the ones that I honestly remembered and did sort of kind of really get behind as far as uh, whenever I think about the films, I envision the music as well, and these were the pieces that did come to mind, at least when it comes to James Horner. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say, though. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.